Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of fascinating sources and extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight. Today, we're embarking on a journey into a topic shrouded in mystery and, frankly, profound misinterpretation: the historical phenomenon of witchcraft. If you think you know the full story of witches, boonsticks, and devil worship, well, prepare for a captivating reevaluation. Our sources challenge the conventional narrative in truly groundbreaking ways.
Indeed, they do. For centuries, the whole subject of witches and witchcraft has really suffered from heavily biased opinions, hasn't it? You've had commentators, both from the time and later on, who either implicitly believed every single bizarre detail of the accusation.
Right, just accepted it all.
Exactly. Or they flat out dismissed everything as pure hallucination or, mass hysteria. But what if there was an entirely different story? An unexamined field of research hiding in plain sight. Our core source for this deep dive is Margaret Alice Murray's groundbreaking work, The Witch Cult in Western Europe, from 1921. Murray meticulously compares the actual legal records of witch trials with anthropological evidence, and she argues that what was observed wasn't mere delusion, but the remnants of an ancient organized religion.
Exactly. Our mission today is to critically examine that raw evidence, primarily from contemporary legal records of the trials themselves, but through the lens of Murray's, well, compelling theory. She posits that the so-called witch cult wasn't simply superstition or random magic or even purely devil worship as we commonly think of it. No, it was a definite, organized ancient religion of Western Europe surviving from pre-Christian times.
A complete belief system.
Yes. With its own distinct deity, its own complex rituals, and a clear organizational structure, all profoundly misunderstood and, well, demonized by its Christian persecutors. Murray argues it was a definite religion with beliefs, rituals, and organization as highly developed as, really, any other cult in the world. So let's unpack this extraordinary claim and discover why this reevaluation truly matters to our understanding of history, human belief, and even how we interpret the past itself.
Okay, so one of the most fascinating and perhaps most misunderstood aspects of this cult, from Murray's perspective, is the central figure, the one at his heart. Now, to the contemporary Christian judges and recorders, this figure was unequivocally the devil.
Right. Satan, Lucifer, the foul fiend, all those names.
Exactly. The enemy of salvation, the very embodiment of evil. They saw him as the complete antithesis of their own God, a force of pure malevolence.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and where Murray's theory takes such a sharp turn from that traditional narrative. To the witches themselves, this very figure, the so-called devil, was their god.
Their God. Not just a tempter or an evil master.
No. He was manifest and incarnate, a tangible divine presence they could interact with. The confessions, even under duress, consistently show they adored him, worshipped him on their knees, invoked him with deep reverence. They called him their Grand Seigneur, or Blessed Savior, even referring to him as their Lord and God's godson.
Wow. Blessed Savior.
Think about that profound inversion. It's not about being coerced by some evil entity. It sounds much more like genuine devotion. For example, Elizabeth Vlamingh in 1595 was accused of not being ashamed to kneel before your Belsbeth, whom you have adored.
Adored, not just feared.
Precisely. Marion Grant in Aberdeen, 1596, likewise, worshipped him on thy knees as thy lord. Anne Armstrong in Northumberland, 1673, even called him her protector, and others sometimes her blessed savior.
So this wasn't a relationship driven by fear of damnation, but faith.
Yeah.
Adoration, even knowing the danger of saying such things.
That's what the record suggests, yes. It points towards a different kind of relationship entirely.
That's a crucial distinction. The consistency in this testimony, even given under torture sometimes, suggests a deliberate and coherent belief system, doesn't it? Not just random madness or a Christian-imposed fantasy. This deity, whether labeled the devil by his persecutors or by other names by his followers, often appeared in various physical forms. And the trial records provides surprisingly vivid and, well, consistent details about his appearance across Europe.
So what did this powerful, revered deity actually look like in their gatherings? The sources give us these vivid details, and there's a remarkable consistency, almost like he wore a specific ritual costume or had a, recognizable persona.
Right. Many accounts describe him in human form. He was frequently seen as a black man.
Okay, a black man. Does that mean complexion or clothing or...?
It's debated. It might refer to dark clothing, maybe a darker complexion, maybe even a mask, But the descriptions also include a handsome man, according to Elizabeth Style in Somerset, a young black man to Busha Barton, or sometimes an elderly man with a gray beard like Bessie Dunlop described her familiar, Tom Reed. back in 1576.
It's quite varied, then, within the human form.
It is. And one fascinating detail from Dalkeith in 1661 mentions him as "ein pretty boy in green clothes."
Green clothes, not black.
No. Or an uncan-like man, meaning uncanny or strange-looking, with a blue bonnet in Kinrossshire. The very specificity of these details across different regions and times is what gives Murray's argument such weight, I think. It's not just a generic evil figure. It's a character with distinct recurring traits.
And the clothing itself is often specified with remarkable precision, right?
Yes, exactly. He is frequently described in black clothes, sure, but also brown, gray, or green, pointing to a varied but consistently non-Christian religious attire, perhaps.
Examples.
Well, a black gown with a black hat. Foliart clothes, which means foliage-colored.
Foliage is colored, like leaves.
Yeah, like camouflage, maybe. Or dun-colored clothes. John Fian, one of the North Berwick witches, initially reported seeing him in white raiment.
White. That's surprising.
It is, especially given the later, darker descriptions. Maybe a shift in appearance or an initial disguise. A Spanish cape or a blue bonnet are also mentioned. The head covering seems to have been a significant part of his costume, suggesting a deliberate disguise rather than just a natural form.
A disguise, like someone playing a role.
Possibly. In Lorraine in 1589, witches reported that devils cannot so expressly imitate the human voice that it isn't easily discernible as a made false voice, sounding like someone with their head in a barrel.
Head in a barrel. That's incredibly specific.
Isn't it? It strongly implies that the devil might have been a human leader using a disguised voice. That supports Murray's view in an organized human cult, not just supernatural encounters.
Okay. And the North Berwick devil in 1590. That description is quite vivid, too.
Very. Described as a mickle black man with a black beard sticking out like a goat's beard and a high-ribbed nose.
Sounds like a mask or maybe an animal hide.
It really does. It points to a highly ritualistic and theatrical appearance, probably intended to evoke awe and reverence, fitting for a deity figure.
So beyond the human appearance, he also took animal forms.
Frequently, yes, especially in France, though maybe not quite as common in Britain. This shape-shifting ability adds another layer to his mystique.
What kind of animals?
Well, a goat, especially in France, sometimes with horns, and even a hat. That's the classic image we often associate with the devil, isn't it? But here, it's his worshipped form.
Right.
He could also appear as a cat, often a black cat, sometimes with a goat's snout.
A cat with a goat's snout?
Bizarre, I know. Or a dog described as a great black or brown dog. Other forms mentioned are a lion, a bear, an ape, even a fox.
Wow. A whole menagerie.
Pretty much. And perhaps the most illustrative example comes from Isabel Gowdy in 1662. She reported him changing continually, appearing as a stirk, that's a young bullock, a bull, a dare, a roe deer, or...
Constantly shifting.
Yeah, this fluidity of form points to a shape-shifting, maybe symbolic or totemic, nature central to their worship. It feels deeply connected to ancient animistic beliefs.
Definitely. And did they call him the devil? Or did they have other names?
Ah, that's another key point. They referred to him by specific names. Names that certainly aren't Satan or Lucifer.
Like what?
Names like Chris and Day, Tom Reed, Robin Son of Artis, Walleman, Trade Massac, Trem Sabbat, Orthon, Janico, Maitre Leonard, Maitre Jean Mullen. These pepper the trial records.
So personal names, almost.
Exactly. And what's truly remarkable, and again, lends strong support to Murray's interpretation, is that he sometimes appeared as respected living community figures.
Wait, as actual people they knew?
Yes. Mr. William Simpson, a doctor, was seen in his form. The Reverend George Burroughs in New England was even accused of being the head actor at their hellish rendezvous. Indeed. This suggests that the devil wasn't always seen as a supernatural entity, but could be perceived as a human leader, perhaps a prominent member of the community, or an itinerant religious figure, adopting various disguises and pseudonyms to lead the cult. It really blurs the lines between the sacred and the mundane, especially through the eyes of their persecutors.
Now, what's truly fascinating is that this devil figure, he wasn't always acting alone, was he? There's mention of a female figure, too.
Yes. Adding another layer of complexity to this ancient religion is the figure of the chief woman in the cult. She's often identified with the Queen of Fairy or Elfin Queen.
The Queen of Fairy. That opens up a whole different connection, doesn't it? It suggests a link between the witch cult and much older fairy lore.
A profound link, yes. It indicates a much deeper, older tradition than purely Christian interpretations of the devil might suggest. It points towards a more balanced, perhaps dualistic divine structure, rather than just a singular male deity.
So it wasn't just about a male god figure.
Precisely. This reveals a more complex pantheon. Bessie Dunlop, back in 1576, reported that Tom Reed, her devil figure, was explicitly under the orders of the Queen of Elflam.
So the female divine was above him in the hierarchy.
That's what it sounds like in that case. Then in 1588, Alison Pearson confessed to banting and repairing with the good Neekboris and Queen of Elfame. That means regularly meeting and interacting with this divine female figure and her retinue, the good neighbors or fairies.
Communing with them.
Right. And Andro Mann in 1597 went even further. He claimed to have had carnal deal with that devilish sprite, the Queen of Elfin, and fathered several children with her.
Wow, okay. Shocking to Christian ears, obviously, but speaks to a different kind of sacred union, maybe, like ancient fertility goddess worship.
That's certainly one interpretation. He also stated that she had a grip of all the craft, suggesting she was a source of magical knowledge and power within the tradition.
So a powerful female presence.
Absolutely. It highlights a dualistic, or at least a more complex and multifaceted divine structure than the simple devil versus God narrative imposed by Christian authorities. It firmly roots the cult in pre-Christian traditions of nature and fertility worship. #2, the structure of the secret faith.
Okay, so if Murray's theory holds water, and this was an organized religion, not just scattered delusion, how did it actually function? What kind of structure allowed it to persist for centuries under such intense persecution? Let's peel back the layers on its surprisingly sophisticated organization.
But the evidence suggests it was indeed highly organized. It featured distinct groups they called covens. That term comes up repeatedly and consistently in trial records across different regions.
Covens. And these groups typically consisted of how many people?
13. That number consistently emerges from confession, suggesting a deliberate, perhaps even sacred grouping.
It's fascinating how consistently that number 13 comes up, isn't it? It's not just a spooky coincidence.
Doesn't seem like it. It's mentioned from the North Berwick witches in 1590, where 39 people, effectively 3 covens, were involved in the wider conspiracy, all the way to Forfar in 1661, where Janet Howitt named 13 individuals in her coven.
And Crook of Devon?
Crook of Devon, 1662, 12 women and 1 man were tried, making a complete coven of 13. And the Lancashire trials of 1613 named 52 individuals. That's 4 full covens who sometimes met together.
So multiple covens meeting.
Yes. This consistency strongly suggests a structured, widespread network. It implies a deliberate, established organizational model, not just spontaneous, uncoordinated gatherings. The very fact that this number appears again and again is powerful evidence for Murray's argument of a coherent system.
And beyond the local coven, was there a broader hierarchy?
There's often talk of a Grand Master overseeing several districts. That suggests a hierarchical structure extending beyond individual groups, indicating a broader, perhaps regional network of these covens. And then there were crucial administrative roles that kept the cult running. The officer or clerk was a particularly vital figure.
What did they do?
They were responsible for warning members of upcoming meetings, for taking oaths of service to the devil, and, fascinatingly, even for record-keeping for the cult.
Record-keeping? Like minutes of the meetings?
It's implied. John Fian, a North Berwick witch, was explicitly described as the clerk to all those that were in subjection to the devil's service. Robert Greaves in Lauder in 1649 was identified as the devil's officer for an astonishing 18 years.
18 years? That's a long time.
It's a remarkable tenure. It highlights the stability and importance of these positions within the cult's infrastructure, suggesting deep-rooted, long-standing leadership roles.
And there was sometimes a female leader too, right? Besides the Queen of Fairy figure.
Yes. Adding to this structure, in some villages, particularly in France, there was also a Queen of the Sabbath, or Grande Maîtresse. She would sit at the devil's left hand during ceremonies and receive offerings, as noted by de Lancre in 1609.
Paralleling the Queen of Elfame idea.
Exactly, reinforcing a kind of dualistic leadership structure. And Isabel Gaudy in 1662 even mentions that Ilk on of Velouzes has een sprit to wait onto the owl, meaning each of them had a familiar spirit.
We'll get to familiars later, but that adds another layer.
It does. All these details paint a picture of a highly hierarchical, structured community, far from the isolated, superstitious individuals often depicted in popular imagination.
Okay, so given this intricate organization, how did someone actually join? How did you become part of this ancient, hidden religion? It sounds like it wasn't a casual decision.
Definitely not. It involved a profound, life-altering commitment, a conversion process that directly mirrored and deliberately inverted Christian rites of initiation.
Inverted them how?
Well, the first and most critical step was an explicit renunciation of Christianity. Candidates had to renounce God, Christ, the Virgin Mary, the saints, their baptism.
Their baptism too, wow.
Yes, and often even their parents, heaven and earth. It was a direct, absolute reversal of Christian conversion, a complete turning away from the dominant religion to embrace this new, forbidden faith. It wasn't just symbolic, it was a profound psychological and spiritual severing. Jeanette d'Abbadie, a 16-year-old accused in 1609, confessed she was made to renounce and deny her Creator, the Holy Virgin, the saints, baptism, father, mother, relatives, heaven, earth, and all that.
Everything.
The sheer scope of that renunciation speaks volumes about the depth of commitment required.
And this wasn't just a verbal thing, there were actions involved.
Right. It was accompanied by deeply symbolic and often physically uncomfortable acts of homage. After the renunciation, vows of fidelity and obedience were sworn to the devil as their god. This often included kneeling before him and, well, the records consistently mention kissing his posteriors as a sign of absolute submission and reverence.
Okay. That detail comes up a lot.
It does, across Europe, Scotland, France, Belgium. It was a clear, unambiguous act of homage, designed perhaps to cement their allegiance in a way that was utterly contrary to Christian practice.
And did they get new names, like converts often do?
Sometimes, yes. Some were given new names like Catherine or Christian after kind of double baptism, or nicknames like Naip for Barbara Napier or Rob the Rower for Robert Grusin. It signified their new identity and belonging within the cult.
And their service, was it for life?
It could be. Service could be for a specific term, like 20 years, 12 years, or 7 years, or sometimes perpetually. It detailed the binding, contractual nature of their commitment to this new life path.
A contract. Which brings us to the witch's mark.
Ah, yes, the infamous witch's mark, or devil's mark.
Yeah.
Christian authorities considered this incontrovertible proof of their allegiance.
What did it look like?
It could be described as a nip in any part of the body, leaving a blue spot or red spot like a flea biting. Reginald Scott, writing back in 1584, described it as made by the devil's teeth or with his claws. Or perhaps more frequently described, it was a little teat, often what we'd call a supernumerary nipple. This was said to secrete milk and allow familiars to suckle, providing nourishment for these companion spirits.
And the key thing for the accusers was?
Insensitivity. Crucially, and noted consistently by the searchers, these marks were usually insensitive to pain or bleeding when pricked. That was seen as definitive evidence of supernatural tampering.
Where were these marks usually found?
Locations varied widely. Shoulders, the fundament, even privy parts. Murray argues these could simply be birthmarks, moles, or other natural blemishes, just reinterpreted through a terrified lens by the persecutors.
And beyond the physical mark, there was sometimes an actual written contract.
Yes, many records mention a written contract. And this is where it gets quite intense, often signed in the witch's own blood.
Their blood.
Sometimes even menstrual blood, adding a powerful, deeply symbolic, and, well, somewhat disturbing element of life force and binding. This contract detailed the terms of service, usually involving giving their body and soul to the devil, a complete surrender.
Wow. Like Steve Note to Audebert, burnt in 1619.
Exactly. She showed de l'encre, her Pacte and Convention, written in menstrual blood, so horrific, qu'on voit horreur de la regarder, that one had horror in looking at it. This was a formal, binding agreement, not just a casual promise. It highlights the depth of commitment and ritual involved in joining this hidden faith. It paints a picture of deliberate, conscious adherence to a new belief system.
So once you were in, how was the faith taught? How was discipline maintained, especially in secret?
Well, like any organized religion, especially one operating under such secrecy and persecution, the cult had a system of instruction and enforcement. The devil himself, as the head of the cult, was considered the primary instructor. He taught the rules of his art, which included how to both hurt and help.
So a kind of magical curriculum, both harmful and helpful magic.
Seems like it. It points to a practical knowledge base being taught within the group, encompassing both malevolent and benevolent applications of their power. A school of magic, if you will.
But it wasn't all just learning spells, right? There were expectations.
Absolutely. Yeah. It wasn't always a benevolent relationship. Witches were expected to account for the wickedness they had committed since the last meeting, essentially reporting on their magical activities and adherence to the cult's directives.
And if they did well?
Rewards for diligence might include money or a life of pleasure. hinting at tangible benefits for loyal service and successful magical operations. A clear incentive structure.
But what if they failed? Or missed meetings?
Well, for absence, negligence, or failing to cause harm as instructed, there were often severe physical punishments. Discipline was strictly enforced.
How severe?
Witches were described as being beaten on the palms of their feet, whipped with iron rods, or even pinched and sucked by their familiars till their heart blood come, until they repented or confessed.
That sounds brutal.
It does. Isabel Gaudi's testimony in 1662 is particularly chilling and vivid. She described intense beatings with cords and other sharp scourges like naked guastes, that's ghosts or spirits wielding sharp scourges while they cried, "Pity, pity, mercy, our Lord."
Pleading with their own god while being punished.
Exactly. She noted that the devil would gurnat fleeke douge, as if he would swallow woos wap, meaning he would snarl at them like a dog, as if he'd swallow them whole. Some accounts even report members dying from these beatings.
Dying? Wow.
It shows the severe, almost brutal discipline enforced within the cult, emphasizing the gravity of their commitment and the very real dangers of disobedience within the organization itself.
And what about keeping secrets? Given the persecution, that must have been paramount.
Absolutely critical. There was a strict oath of silence, enforced by severe threats of martyrdom, or even death if secrets were revealed.
Threats from whom? The authorities or the cult?
From the cult. Becca West, an Essex witch in 1645, was explicitly told she would endure more torments on earth than could be in hell if she confessed to the authorities.
More torments than hell.
Right. This explains why confessions, when they occurred, were often given under extreme duress or physical torture by the state. The witches faced an impossible choice: horrifying state torture, or equally terrifying supernatural retribution from their own deity and cult leaders.
Caught between a rock and a hard place.
Completely. The very existence of such an oath and the extreme measures to enforce it strongly suggests a clandestine organization with vital secrets to protect.
Okay, so we have this highly structured organization, strict discipline. How did members actually get to their secret meetings, their Sabbats and Sabbats? It couldn't always have been easy, right? Especially if they lived far apart.
No, it wasn't always simple. While some undoubtedly traveled on foot, even over surprisingly long distances according to the records, many accounts describe more extraordinary and, well, ritualized means of locomotion.
More than just walking.
Oh yes. Witches claimed to ride on horses, sometimes using enchanted bridles, or even on transformed animals or human beings who served as their steeds.
Riding transformed people.
That's what some confessions claim. This transformation, or the perception of it, points to a ritualistic and perhaps hallucinatory experience intricately tied to their practices, blurring the lines between physical reality and altered states of consciousness.
And then, of course, there's the flying, the classic image.
Yes, the most sensational claims involve flying. This is where the popular image of the witch on a broomstick really takes root.
How did they supposedly do it?
Some accounts describe witches using flying ointments. The recipes recorded are chillingly specific and highly toxic. Ingredients like the fat of young children, bat's blood, and highly toxic plants, aconite, belladonna, hemlock.
Whoa! Those are poisons.
Deadly poisons, yes. But Professor A.J. Clark, whose pharmacological notes Murray includes, details how these drugs, when rubbed onto the body, especially on sensitive areas like mucous membranes, could induce powerful physiological sensation.
Like what?
Well, aconite can cause irregular heart action, leading to a dizzying sensation of falling. Belladonna is known for inducing excitement, delirium, and a feeling of levitation or disembodiment. Hemlock can cause paralysis, but also profound delirium.
So they wouldn't actually fly, but they'd feel like they were flying.
Precisely. While actual physical flight is impossible, the sensation of flight, falling through space, delirium, vivid hallucinations, these could certainly be physiologically induced by these potent concoctions. It gives rise to these consistent confessions of aerial travel. It's a compelling scientific underpinning for what might otherwise be dismissed as pure fantasy.
That makes a strange kind of sense, a chemically induced experience.
Indeed, the pharmacological effects are well documented. When you consider the impact of these powerful hallucinogens, it's clear the physical and mental experiences described could be very real to them. Even if the flight itself wasn't objectively happening, it creates a vivid internal reality.
And besides ointments, did they use objects like broomsticks?
Yes. They also reported riding on sticks or poles, which could simply be disguised brooms or staffs, or even riddles or sieves for sea travel, like the North Berwick witches said to sail in sieves.
Sailing in sieves.
Quite the image. Isabel Gowdy vividly described how they would say, "Horse and haddock," in the Develli's name. As they flew, "Link straws will fly upon a highway." A fantastic image of them moving with incredible speed.
Horse and haddock, like a command.
Seems so. Specific incantations were also used for travel, like the Somerset Witches chant, "Thought dot 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 tout throughout and about" for departure, and "Renui tormentum" for return. These phrases suggest a ritualistic set of words to initiate and conclude their journeys, reinforcing the structured nature of their magic and beliefs.
Okay, so once they arrived, by whatever means, what were the meetings like? You mentioned 2 types.
Yes, the cult had 2 main types of assemblies. The Sabbath, which is the major general meeting, sometimes bringing together multiple covens, and the Esbat, a more local and frequent meeting for specific purposes within a single coven, perhaps.
And the Sabbath, the big one. Where and when was that held?
Almost always at night. Often at significant liminal locations, places on the edge, crossroads, churchyards.
Churchyard, seriously?
Yes, like the witches in Aberdeen, who danced around the market, and fish crosses on All Hallow Eve, literally transforming Christian spaces into their own ritual grounds. They also met on hills like the Hill of Earlseat, or even specific houses, like the famous Blockula in Sweden, apparently a common meeting place for continental witches.
So, places with existing significance, either ancient pagan sites or deliberately provocative locations.
Exactly. This choice of venue is another strong indicator of the deep historical roots of the cult.
And the timing. Did they follow a particular calendar?
They did, and the dates of their chief festivals point particularly strongly to a pre-agricultural pastoral calendar. It emphasizes animal breeding seasons over crop cycles.
Which dates were those?
These were the cross-quarter days, ancient Celtic festivals marking the midpoints between solstices and equinoxes. May Eve, April 30th, also called Roodmas or Walpurgisnacht, November Eve, October 31st, All Hallow Eve, what we know as Halloween, Candlemas, February 2, and Lemmas, August 1st, or the Ghoul of August.
Those are old dates, really old.
Very old. They relate directly to the pastoral year when livestock breeding starts, when animals are brought in from pasture. It indicates the origins of the cult in a society where livestock are paramount, long before settled agriculture became dominant. This calendar is a crucial piece of anthropological evidence for Murray's argument.
And did they adopt any Christian holidays too?
Interestingly, yes. With the advent of Christianity, some Christian festivals were also incorporated: Easter, Christmas, St. John the Baptist's Eve, Good Friday.
Why would they do that?
It shows a kind of veneer of Christian rites overlaid upon ancient customs, perhaps a strategic adaptation. A way to blend in or absorb elements from the dominant culture to survive, much like early Christianity itself adapted pagan holidays.
Makes sense. And the Esbat, the smaller meeting.
That one had no fixed day or hour. It allowed the devil or an officer to signal the time as needed, offering flexibility for regular local gatherings and planning. More practical, perhaps.
So, once gathered, what actually happened? What were the core rituals?
Well, homage, as we mentioned earlier, was key. Kneeling, the kissing of the devil's body, sometimes his posteriors, that consistent detail signifying extreme submission and reverence. Shocking to Christian sensibilities, yes, but possibly designed to invert Christian worship and affirm complete devotion to the cult's leader.
And dancing, that comes up a lot too.
Oh yes, dancing was central, energetic. The sources describe ring dances around objects, or the enthroned devil and follow my leader dances, sometimes even back-to-back, or cull against cull, rump to rump.
Sounds pretty wild.
Very different from the controlled dances of the period, often suggesting wild abandonment. They danced madly, often singing incantations or devotional chants like, "Har, har, divil, divil, dance here, play here, play here, Sabbath, Sabbath."
Okay.
Music was provided by pipes, viols, or simply songs, creating an ecstatic, trance-inducing atmosphere. Much like communal celebrations in many ancient religions, where movement and song facilitate spiritual connection.
And after the dancing, was there food? A feast?
Often, yes. A feast followed these ceremonies, either indoors or outdoors, serving as a communal meal. The food quality varied, though, sometimes described as good viands, other times very bad, perhaps reflecting the varied circumstances of these clandestine groups.
Did they bring their own food sometimes?
Yes, like bread and cheese eaten under a tree, as Goodwife Foster described in Salem. A specific grace was recited before meals, sometimes a corrupted version of an ancient form, indicating a ritualized meal.
Any complaints about the food?
Rarely, but Robert Wilson noted, Sathan gave you both meat and drink sundry times, but it never did you any good, and Janet Brew got rough bread and sour drink. So while it was ritual food, maybe not always top cuisine.
Huh. And was anything forbidden at these feasts?
Yes, salt was explicitly taboo, a fascinating and consistent detail suggesting its specific, ritualistic prohibition, perhaps linked to ancient ideas about salt's purifying properties or its use in Christian rites, making it something to be avoided in their own.
Interesting. And besides feasting and dancing, was there a more formal religious service at the Sabbath?
Yes, the Sabbath included a more formal religious service, often described as a mock mass by Christian observers, but undoubtedly a solemn and sacred ritual for the practitioners.
What did that involve?
The devil, acting as the cult leader, would dress as a priest in black vestments, visually inverting the white robes of Christian clergy. He would elevate something like a round of turnip tinted in black, or a black and round host with his figure imprinted on it, proclaiming, "This is my body."
Directly echoing the Eucharist.
Directly. He would preach blasphemies against God, claiming him they saw but God they could not see, asserting the tangible presence of their own deity versus the unseen Christian God.
And holy water.
Holy water was made from his urine, referred to as asperges diaboli, an ultimate act of defiance and inversion. Black candles were used for light. These details show a deliberate inversion or parody of Christian rites, making them recognizable to the persecutors while serving the cult's own sacred purposes, affirming their new forbidden faith.
So beyond worship and celebration, what was the business of these meetings?
Well, beyond the celebratory and religious aspects, the assemblies were profoundly functional. They served as forums for planning and executing magical acts. These weren't just gatherings for worship, they were also for the practical application of their beliefs, for affecting the world around them through their magic.
And this is where the darker reputation comes in, right? Harming people or property.
Exactly. This aligns with many of the historical accusations. Much of the business involved harming specific persons or property, which, from the Christian perspective, was undeniably malicious.
Like what kinds of things?
The North Berwick witches, for instance, famously attempted to wreck ships by magic, even obtaining dead men's bones for charms, apparently aimed at harming King James VI himself.
Raising storms at sea.
Yes. The Langnidri witches reported they christened a cat, a ritual in itself, and then cursed the cat to the devil, meaning they killed and consecrated the cat to their deity, specifically to raise a tempest.
Wow. And what about harming individuals?
Witches would commonly make wax or clay images, often baptized with the victim's name, to destroy enemies by sticking thorns into them. Classic sympathetic magic aimed at causing illness or death. They would also trample down crops to destroy harvests, showing a claimed mastery over the natural world, often for destructive purposes, or at least interpreted that way by their accusers.
But was it all harmful? Did they ever use magic to help?
That's important too. The sources also indicate that the devil instructed witches in helping and curing diseases. Familiars could provide divination, offering insights into the future or hidden knowledge.
So healing and fortune-telling too.
Yes. It demonstrates that the cult also served as a source of practical aid and foresight for its members and perhaps their communities. It shows a dual nature to their magic, encompassing both constructive, healing powers and destructive, harmful ones. This complexity really challenges the simplistic evil witch narrative.
Okay, so moving beyond the structure and rituals, let's talk about the purpose. Murray argues this wasn't just about power or malice, but something deeper, right? Something about fertility.
Yes, absolutely. Despite the Christian interpretations of these practices as purely devilish arts, a careful anthropological examination, as Murray presents it, reveals that the witch cult was, at its very core, deeply rooted in an ancient fertility cult.
A fertility cult, like ancient pagan religions focused on crops and livestock and babies.
Exactly. This is a crucial reinterpretation. It shifts the focus from pure evil and a Christian devil to an older, nature-based spirituality concerned with life, growth, and abundance.
That insight, it explains so much of what seemed contradictory or just bizarre in the trial records, doesn't it?
It really does. The laws against heathen rites by the Christian church consistently, almost obsessively, focused on witches' claimed powers over fertility.
The fertility of what?
Specifically, the fertility of human beings, animals, and crops. The very things they were accused of harming were the same things that ancient, pre-Christian fertility cults sought to promote and protect through their rituals.
So the accusations themselves reveal the nature of the original practice.
In a way, yes. Look at the infamous bull of Pope Innocent VIII in 1484, the one often seen as kicking off the big European witch hunts. It explicitly condemns witches for causing the perishing of births of women, the increase of animals, the corn of the ground, the grapes of the vineyard, and the fruit of the trees, and for impeding conjugal action.
That sounds exactly like fertility concern.
Precisely. It's the language of a fertility cult, just inverted and demonized by the dominant Christian worldview. The accusations themselves betray the underlying nature of the practices they were trying to stamp out.
So give me some examples from the trials. How did this focus on fertility manifest?
Well, for human fertility, witches were accused of giving and taking away power from sundry men's genital members and impeding conjugal action, essentially causing impotence or infertility. But, presumably, they also claimed the power to bestow fertility. Janet Clark in Edinburgh in 1590 was accused of causing impotence.
And animals.
On the animal side, the Red Book of Appin, a magical text supposedly obtained from the devil himself, was believed to contain charms specifically for curing cattle diseases and promoting animal fertility. Witches would even stand by cows to aid their bulling, a direct, hands-on intervention in livestock reproduction. It emphasizes their concern with the practical aspects of fertility.
And crops. You mentioned destroying crops earlier.
Yes, but charms for good harvests were also common within the cult. It's just that later their accusers twisted this into being about blasting crops or causing blight, even their methods for rainmaking.
Like raising storms.
Well, while witnesses interpreted it as raising destructive storms, methods like throwing flint stones behind their backs, flinging sea sand into the air, sprinkling water with broom twigs, or stirring water in a pit, these were originally methods for producing fertilizing rain.
Ah, agricultural magic.
Exactly. Ancient rituals to bring life-giving water to the land. Nudity rites were also associated with this, connecting directly to ancient agricultural magic and the idea of humans mirroring the fertile earth. It reveals a profound disconnect between the intent of the practitioners and the interpretation of the persecutors.
Okay, fertility makes sense as an ancient focus. What about sacrifice? Was that part of this cult too?
Sacrifice was integral, yes. It seems to have evolved over time from its ancient roots, but it was a core practice central to their belief system and its desired effects on the world, whether promoting fertility, gaining power, or causing harm.
Both animal and human sacrifices.
The record suggests both, yes, each with specific purposes outlined in the confessions.
What kinds of animal sacrifices?
Dogs, cats, hens, redcocks were common offerings, sometimes given as thanks, sometimes to gain help for a specific magical operation. John Walsh, in Dorset back in 1566, had to give his spirit some living thing, like a chicken or a cat, once a year as an annual tribute.
And the North Berwick witches christening a cat.
Right, that famous example. They christened the cat by the name of Margaret, an extraordinary ritual, and then cursed the cat to the devil, ritually killing and offering it to their deity, specifically to raise a tempest. It shows a complex ritualistic purpose beyond simple killing.
And human sacrifice, that's much darker.
It is. Accounts of child sacrifice, though horrifying to modern sensibilities and deeply disturbing, were unfortunately substantiated in some records, according to Murray.
Why would they do that?
Often to procure magical materials or powers, particularly for potions and ointments. For example, the remains of unbaptized infants were reportedly used to make pies. Yes, which, when eaten, were believed to confer taciturnity, meaning the witches who consumed them would never confess their witchcraft, even under torture. A way to protect the cult's secrets.
That's incredibly grim.
It is. And then you have figures like the notorious Abbé Guibourg in Paris between 1679 and 81. He reportedly performed black masses involving the sacrifice of children, not necessarily for the cult's own purposes, but to gain royal favor for clients like Madame de Montespan. This highlights the extreme and dark end of these practices, perhaps corrupted or co-opted over time.
Okay, that leads us to one of the most provocative and challenging ideas from Murray's source. The concept of the sacrifice of the God incarnate. What does that mean?
It's a radical idea. Accounts from France and Belgium describe the devil, often in goat form, consuming himself in fire, becoming ashes, which were then distributed to followers to use for, well, often malevolent magic.
The God sacrificing himself.
Or being sacrificed, yes. It suggests a decadent form of human sacrifice, or at least a ritualistic death and rebirth of their deity for the benefit of the cult and its continued power. It's a shocking inversion of Christian concepts of divine sacrifice, where a god dies for humanity. Here, the god dies or is sacrificed perhaps by humanity for its own ends.
And this is where Murray brings in Joan of Arc in Joan of Arc.
Exactly. This is where she makes her most radical reinterpretation. She proposes they weren't merely Christian heretics, but figures whose death represented the sacrifice of the incarnate God within this Dianic cult, her term for this ancient nature-based religion.
So Joan of Arc as a sacrificed god figure.
That's the argument. Joan's famous voices, which she met near the Tree of the Fairy Ladies at Domremy, a known site of pagan associations, were seen by her judges as damning evidence of her connection to evil spirits. She consistently refused to take an oath on the Gospels, a fundamental Christian rite she could easily have performed.
Why refuse?
Murray suggests maybe it was against her true faith and her wearing male costume. Murray suggests this was an outward sign of that faith, a deliberate relapse in the eyes of her Christian persecutors if she had previously converted.
And her belief in her mission, her martyrdom.
Her unwavering belief in her own divine mission, her sense of limited time, and her calm acceptance of martyrdom are framed not as Christian piety, but as the destiny of an incarnate God in the older cult, whose sacrifice was deemed necessary for the vitality of the faith. Her ultimate unwavering resolve at the stake, after initial doubt, could be interpreted as her fulfilling this sacred, predetermined role.
That's a huge claim. It completely reframes her story.
It's massive. And similarly, Gilles de Rais, Joan's commander and a powerful nobleman, executed just 9 years later on the same charge of witchcraft. Murray notes the number of people arrested with him plus those already dead conveniently totals 13, suggesting a coven was involved. And his immense prodigality, his famous wasteful spending, typically viewed as profligacy. But Murray asks, could it be viewed not as personal moral failing, but as fulfilling the role of a religious leader, perhaps funding elaborate activities or ceremonies?
So there are historical roles reinterpreted through this religious lens.
Precisely. This recontextualization challenges established narratives and offers a fascinating, if controversial, alternative. It urges us to look beyond the dominant interpretations and consider what underlying beliefs might have been at play.
Okay, one more difficult aspect of the fertility cult idea, the sexual rituals.
Yes, the presence of sexual ritual, however obscene or horrifying to Christian commentators, is a consistent feature in fertility cults across cultures and history.
Why? What was the purpose?
These rites symbolized, and in the actor's belief, actively promoted fertility in the animate world, human, animal, and crop. They were not mere debauchery, but sacred acts within their belief system, meant to encourage life and growth.
And this connects to that strange detail about the devil being cold.
Exactly. This is where the famous and consistently reported coldness of the devil comes in. Across Europe, from women of all ages and statuses, unmarried, married, widows, even men sometimes reported similar sensations, the testimony was remarkably consistent. The devil was described as cold, and his seed likewise.
Like Isabel Gaudi's description.
Yes, she and Janet Bredheid both said the devil was a meekle, black, rock man, weary cold, and I found his nature also as cold within me as spring well water. This striking uniformity across diverse regions without apparent collusion points to a shared, consistent physical reality experienced within the ritual. It wasn't just imagination.
So what does Murray think explains this coldness?
Well, this consistent experience leads to one of her most compelling arguments. The force posits that this coldness, combined with descriptions of the devil's phallus,
Descriptions like,
for example, as large as a fork-handle, reported from Lorraine in 1598, or made of scales, and causing extreme pain from France in 1598, or being heavier than a man's, according to Widow Bush in 1645. Murray argues this strongly indicates the use of artificial phallus during these sacred marriages or sexual rituals.
artificial, like ritual objects.
Exactly. This would logically explain the consistent reports of coldness, the pain described by some, and the frequently noted sterility of the encounters. These artificial objects wouldn't be warm like human flesh or capable of impregnation.
And this fits with other ancient cults.
Perfectly. It aligns with ancient fertility cult practices, where such objects, often overtly phallic, were carried in processions as symbols of generative power and sometimes used in ritual. It offers a logical, practical explanation for an otherwise bizarrely consistent and inexplicable detail from the confessions.
That actually makes a lot of sense in that context. And children weren't involved in these specific rites?
Generally not, no. The sources suggest rules apparently govern age of admission for full participation, reinforcing their mature adult religious context.
And sometimes it wasn't the devil himself, but a familiar spirit.
Yes, sometimes the familiar spirit would act as a sexual partner. The records note men witches usually have women's spirits and women witches men's spirits. These connections could even lead to marriage ceremonies recorded in trials, further solidifying the idea of intimate, formalized relationships and ritual unions within the cult, far beyond mere casual encounters.
Okay, you mentioned familiars a few times. Let's dive into that. These weren't the main deity, but something more personal.
Exactly. Distinct from the central deity figure, witches often had a personal, familiar spirit, or imp, a companion and helper intimately connected to the individual practitioner.
Like a magical assistant?
Pretty much. These familiars often appeared as animals, but sometimes in human-like forms. They provided a direct, intimate link to magical power for the individual witch.
So beyond the devil figure, witches had these supernatural aides, companions in their daily lives and magic.
That's the picture painted by the records, yes. They were described with incredible vividness and detail as cats, white-spotted, gray-black, dogs, great black brindled, toads, weasels, mice, frogs, sparrows, crows, hares, horses.
A real variety of animals.
Yes, or even a black creature like an Indian or a black shaggy bear. Some were even described as taking the form of a young man or boy. These descriptions are so varied, yet specific, hinting at the personalized nature of these companions. It suggests each witch had a unique, distinct relationship with their familiar.
And they had names, like pets.
Yes, just like pets or perhaps even cherished family members. Names were consistently given, further emphasizing the personal bond and distinct identity. The records are full of them.
Give me some examples.
Lightfoot, Lunch, Mateshift, Pretty, Lily, Priscilla, Jack, Becaire, Frog, James, Robin, Sparrow, Margaret, Amy, Susan, Minnie, Tib, Joan, Swine, Rory, the Roaring Lion, many, many others.
Lunch and Makeshift. Interesting names.
Aren't they? These names, extracted directly from trial records, reinforce the idea of a close, almost domestic relationship with these spirits. They highlight the everyday reality of their presence in the witches' lives.
So how did someone get a familiar? Did they just show up?
Murray's research points to four main ways, suggesting a structured system of transmission and propagation within the cult.
Okay, what are they?
Firstly, the devil himself, as the cult leader, could directly bestow a familiar upon an initiate. This could be a divining familiar for prophecy, or a domestic familiar for daily tasks or mischief. Elizabeth Weed, in Huntingdonshire in 1646, reported 3 spirits appeared to her, one in the likeness of a young man or boy, and the other 2 of 2 puppies, the one white and the other black. A direct gift.
Okay, a gift from the leader. What else?
Secondly, domestic familiars could also be gifted between witches, sometimes in exchange for a simple item like an oven cake. This indicates a form of communal exchange or transaction within the community.
Passing them around almost.
Sort of. Thirdly, and perhaps most revealingly for the idea of an ongoing tradition, many inherited their familiars, often from their mothers or other female relatives.
Ah, so it ran in families.
It seems so, indicating a generational transmission of the cult and its practices. Susan Cock, for example, received 2 imps from her dying mother. A clear illustration of this hereditary aspect, supporting the idea of an ancient familial tradition.
And the fourth way?
Finally, some accounts suggest familiars could be obtained through specific magical ceremonies or rites, like taking communion bread, a highly sacred Christian element, and offering it to the spirit. A deliberate perversion of Christian sacrament for their own purposes, showing that ongoing tension between the 2 belief systems.
And what was the relationship like? You mentioned them sucking on the witch's mark.
Yes, the relationship was incredibly intimate and highly functional. Familiars often sucked the witch, typically on the teat or mark, for nourishment. That was a detail constantly sought by the witch finders as proof.
And what did the familiar do in return?
In return for this sustenance, these familiars performed various tasks, hurting or killing people and animals, avenging enemies, or even providing divination. They were essentially an extension of the witch's power, reflecting a highly personalized aspect of the cult's magic. They offered practical aid in daily life or in specific magical operations, blurring the lines between companion and magical tool.
Okay, let's talk about that connection you mentioned earlier between witches and fairies. That seems like a really crucial part of Murray's argument about this being an ancient religion.
It is striking how often the lore of witches and fairies intertwines in the sources, particularly in the older confessions from Scotland and England. Anthropologically, there's a strong tie. Some scholars, including Murray, even suggest the 2 are identical, or at least closely related expressions of the same underlying belief system.
Identical. So fairies were witches, or witches were fairies.
Or rather, that the beliefs and practices attributed to both stem from the same ancient root. This connection isn't superficial. It goes to the very core of the belief system, revealing its profound antiquity.
So this hints at a much older cultural tradition than just devil worship, as Christianity defined it.
Exactly. The sources strongly suggest that the cult of the fairy or primitive race survived, and that its practitioners, over time, became known as witches by the dominant Christian culture as it sought to suppress them.
So maybe all those charming, sometimes whimsical stories of fairies and good neighbors, the mischievous but sometimes helpful folk, are actually veiled references.
Hmm.
Christian filtered glimpses of a living, hidden religion and its practitioners.
That's the implication. It completely redefines folklore itself, suggesting it might contain echoes of suppressed religious practices.
What kind of shared elements support this theory?
We see numerous shared elements in the records. Explicit mentions of fairy dances, meetings on fairy hills, places long associated with supernatural beings in ancient sites. There's the exchange of money between humans and these beings, instruction in magic, like healing with herbs, which could be reinterpreted as countering blasting by fairies, depending on perspective.
And a king of the fairies.
Yes, and even the presence of a king of the fairies, who, remarkably, could be equated with the devil figure of the witch cult in some accounts. It completes the conceptual circle and solidifies the link between these two seemingly separate traditions.
Can you give some specific examples from the trials where this overlap is clear?
Oh, absolutely. The records are quite compelling. Back in 1576, Bessie Dunlop's familiar, Tom Reed, her devil figure, remember, was explicitly under the orders of the Queen of Elfland.
Directly linking the witch's deity to the Queen of Fairy.
Precisely. Then Alison Pearson, in 1588, was convicted for banting and repairing with the good Neckbris and Queen of Elfame, openly admitting to consorting with the fairy folk and their queen.
And Androman, the one who claimed to have fathered children with the queen.
Yes, in 1597. He claimed that, and also that his master, Chrysanде, his devil figure, sways to the Queen of Elfin, acknowledging her authority over his own leader.
Wow. Any others?
Joan Willamot, in 1618, was told by her master to open her mouth and he would blow into her a fairy which should do her good, suggesting familiars themselves could be perceived as fairies.
Blown into her mouth. Strange.
Very. And perhaps one of the most vivid examples is the White Powder Man from 1627. A man accused of invoking evil spirits, but he performed cures. He said he learned his skill from a gentlewoman who led him into a little hill that opened up to reveal a fair hall.
A hollow hill. Classic fairy trope.
Absolutely. Inside, a queen sitting in great state taught him how to use the white powder for healing. This is a classic fairy encounter narrative, a direct portal to the other world. Only here, it's being retold and prosecuted through the lens of witchcraft persecution.
Okay, so this deep connection between fairy lore and witchcraft. This leads back to Murray's radical reinterpretation of Joan of Arc and Gilles de Rais, doesn't it?
Yes. Based on this ancient connection, the source posits that these two immensely famous historical figures, both executed as witches, were not merely Christian heretics. Instead, much of the mysteries surrounding their trials can be explained by their connection to this Dianic cult. Murray's term for this ancient religion rooted in nature worship, possibly linked to fairy beliefs, as opposed to simply devil worship.
It's such a controversial claim, but let's walk through it again for Joan. Her voices.
Her voices. They weren't Christian saints appearing to her, at least not in Murray's reading. She met them specifically near the Tree of the Fairy Ladies at Domremy, a site known locally for pagan associations and beliefs about spirits. Her judges seized on this as damning evidence of her connection to evil spirits.
And her refusal to swear on the Gospels. And the male clothing.
Crucially, she consistently refused that oath, a fundamental Christian rite she could easily have performed. And she steadfastly wore male costume throughout her trial. Murray suggests this wasn't just practicality, but perhaps an outward sign of that faith, a deliberate marker of her allegiance, seen as a relapse by her persecutors.
And her acceptance of martyrdom.
Her unwavering belief in her divine mission, her constant reference to having limited time, and her calm, almost willing acceptance of martyrdom are framed not as Christian piety, but as the destiny of an incarnate God within this older cult, whose sacrifice was deemed necessary for the vitality and continuation of the faith. Her final resolve at the stake is seen as fulfilling this sacred role.
And Gilles de Rais, her commander, executed 9 years later for the same thing.
Yes, the source notes the convenient total of 13 people involved with him, arrested, plus already dead, suggesting a coven. And his immense prodigality, his notorious spending, maybe not just moral decay, but fulfilling the role of a leader, funding the religion's activities.
It reframes them completely, not just as Christian figures gone wrong, but possibly leaders of a rival ancient faith.
Exactly. It challenges the established historical narratives and offers a fascinating, if debatable, alternative. It urges us to consider the hidden religious currents that might have shaped their fates. Murray also points to Major Weir, executed as a witch in Edinburgh much later, in the 17th century. He steadfastly refused all attempts at Christian conversion right up to his execution, suggesting he too may have been a leader sacrificing himself for his hidden faith. #outro.
So wrapping this all up, what does this mean for our understanding of history and human belief? Margaret Alice Murray's research, digging deep into those old trial records and comparing them with anthropology, it really forces us to question some deeply held assumptions about witchcraft, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It suggests that what was prosecuted, often brutally, as devil worship, was in fact potentially a tenacious, organized, and deeply rooted ancient religion, one that adapted and survived in the shadows of dominant Christianity for centuries.
So not just superstition, not random acts of malice, not mass hysteria, but a coherent, if clandestine, system of belief and practice with its own gods, its own rituals, its own hierarchy.
That's the argument, and it raises a truly profound and important question, I think. If this potentially powerful, organized religion was so thoroughly misinterpreted, demonized, and suppressed by the dominant powers of the time, then how much of what we still dismiss as mere superstition or folklore or primitive belief might actually be the misunderstood remnants of complex, organized systems of thought and practice?
That's a huge question. It challenges us to reconsider how history is written, doesn't it? How narratives are shaped by the victors, and how dominant interpretations often obscure underlying realities.
It really does.
Exactly. It challenges us, to look beyond the surface, to appreciate the enduring power of human belief, and to consider what other truths might be obscured by the biases of history, whether those biases are religious, political, or social. So, for you, our listener, maybe the next time you hear a tale of witches or fairies or encounter any ancient custom that seems bizarre or irrational, just consider what deeper ancient truth might be hidden beneath the surface of that story. What other superstitions might mask deeply rooted historical practices or belief systems if we just dared to look beyond the accepted narrative, if we listen to the voices from the past like Murray tried to do without the filter of prejudice?
It's a powerful thought. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring.
Until next time.